We've all heard the criticisms of President Trump, which go something like this.
No president has come close to defaming and trying to destroy the democratic values of this country. No president has come close.
Does he know he's tearing down these institutions?
Does he know he's tearing it down? He shatters norms for a living.
How much longer can we survive the autocratic tendencies of one man?
This is revealing his autocratic tendencies. Donald Trump has no real commitment to democracy.
No, the only other team has the commitment to democracy. That's why they're always trying to undermine it and undo the election. Look, if any of that were true, why on earth would President Trump nominate a man like Bill Barr as his attorney general? Now, Barr, no matter what you think, he's a mainstream, safe pick. He's a consummate pro who served in the Reagan administration and later as George H.W. Bush's counsel at the Department of Justice before being promoted to attorney general. Now, full disclosure, he's a friend. Don't hold that against him. But the bottom line is he knows the legal terrain really well, and he even oversaw the Robert Mueller guy that we're focused on once before when Mueller was head of DOJ's criminal division. And if there's any question about Barr's independence, well, that was put to rest at today's hearing.
What would be your breaking point? When would you pick up and leave? When is your Jim Mattis moment? When the president has asked you to do something which you think is inconsistent with your oath?
I am not going to do anything that I think is wrong, and I will not be bullied into doing anything I think is wrong by anybody, whether it be editorial boards or Congress or the president. I'm going to do what I think is right.
Oh, and as for the Democratic drumbeat that Trump only selects people he can control and who essentially agree to, I don't know, some sort of loyalty pledge.
President Trump has sought no assurances, promises, or commitments from me of any kind, either express or implied, and I have not given him any, other than that I would run the department with professionalism and integrity.
Now, Barr testified that he wants Mueller to complete his probe and has confidence in Mueller's professionalism. But that wasn't enough for some, like Senator Pat Leahy, who tried to get Barr to vow to recuse himself from oversight of the Mueller probe if the staff at the DOJ suggests he do so.
So will you commit, if confirmed, to both seeking and following the advice of the department's career ethics officials on whether you must recuse from the special counsel's investigation?
I will seek the advice of the career ethics personnel, but under the regulations, I make the decision as the head of the agency as to my own recusal. So I certainly would consult with them, and at the end of the day, I would make a decision in good faith based on the laws and the facts that are evident at that time.
I'm sorry, we're all sitting here in the studio. He reminds me so much of Justice Scalia, just his inflection and the way he reacts to questions. I just brought it back. It was odd. Anyway, it's clear that Barr is his own man. And contrary to some of the nasty tweets out there, tweets from the right like this, well, Scott Dennis says, I don't trust Barr. He seems awfully cozy with many of the people surrounding the whole Spygate scandal. All right, I get the concern, but all I can say is this. I've known Barr for 20-plus years. He's a man of deep integrity, and he has a really strong intellect. We need that today at the Department of Justice. And he comes at a very important time in the life of all of these law enforcement agencies. He sees his job in what I think is the correct light.
Why do you want this job?
Well, because I love the department. I love and all its components, including the FBI. I think they're critical institutions that are essential to preserving the rule of law, which is the heartbeat of this country.
Doing it because he loves the country. I don't need to do this. 68 years old, to go be on a beach somewhere. He wants to serve the nation. Well, Bill Barr couldn't assume this job of Attorney General fast enough, especially given the revelations of the FBI's war against this president. Remember, it was just last Friday that we learned about another sickening effort by certain bad actors inside the Bureau to target the president. Remember, after Peter Strzok's insurance policy failed to prevent Trump from winning the White House, Comey's FBI cronies pulled another surprise out of its bag of tricks. They launched an unconstitutional and unprecedented counter-intel investigation of the sitting president. They should all be fired, at least those who are still working within the department. Well, by the way, this was supposedly done, get this, because Trump fired Comey, which, of course, if they read their little pocket constitution, the president was fully entitled to do under Article 2 of the Constitution. Now, the Inspector General's final report should expose all of this. Can't wait. And as if things couldn't get more poisonous, we learned today that the former general counsel of the FBI, James Baker, himself is under investigation for media leaks against President Trump. Turns out he was in regular contact with Mother Jones leftist writer David Corn. Are they still publishing? Well, it's just a coincidence, I'm sure. Remember, it was the first to report on that phony Steele dossier, you know, the thing that was the predicate used to start the entire Trump-Russia probe. Barr understands the danger inherent in a Department of Justice that becomes its own political strike force and the danger of criminalizing politics and of overzealous prosecutors.
The prosecutor comes along and says, well, we're going to look into your mind and see what your subjective intent was for performing these two sets of lawful acts, and we're going to say, you know, that you're corrupt. Good. So I just think that gives too much power to the prosecutor.
Totally agree, even separate from what has happened to President Trump. If Democrats really cared, as they claim, about the rule of law and restoring the public's faith in the Justice Department, they would welcome with open arms the nomination of Bill Barr. But because many of them, not all, but many, are infected with this anti-Trump virus, everyone Trump nominates, every idea that Trump has, must be resisted or the individuals involved at least bruised in the process. But today, they didn't lay a glove on Bill Barr, and that's the angle.